24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Middle Path Radio, your Islamic companion.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're listening to Middle Path Radio. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Straight Talk. Tonight we have an interesting topic which I believe everyone talks about this when they have a gathering. And this is scholars. What role do they play in shaping our views, thinking and decisions? So tonight we want to look at the role of the scholars in Islam. I want to start by quoting a couple of hadiths. The Prophet ﷺ said, there are two groups of my ummah that when they are pious, my ummah will be upright, and when they are immoral, my ummah will be corrupt. The Messenger of Allah ﷺ, was asked, who are they? He answered, the religious scholars and the rulers. Another hadith which is very famous, I'm sure everyone knows about this, the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. So really this topic is very interesting and always comes up in our discussions and debates. So tonight I want to avoid having fiqh discussions like what makes a good scholar, his ijaza or the technical realities. I want to completely avoid those discussions, inshallah. Rather, I want to understand how the ummah, the people view scholars, the role they play in our lives. We would love to hear from you. How do you see scholars? And what role do they play in your lives? And if you are a scholar, please get in touch. Tell us the reality of your work and clear up some of the misconceptions. You can call, text 074 77 080 248, or you can tweet us at Middle Path Radio. Our special guest tonight has pulled out due to illness. Brother Sheikh Fahim, he sends his apologies. May Allah make it easy for him. But not to worry, we are joined by our regular contributor to this show, Brother Abdul Samad, who doesn't really need an introduction. And also last minute, but a pleasure to have with us, Brother Abu Muhammad, who is very active in the Islamic Dawah. Jazakallah khair, brother. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Remember, get involved. Our number is 074 77 080 248. Brother Muhammad, let me ask you, scholars are the inheritors of the Prophet. We hear that all the time. What does it really mean in practicality?
Jazakallah khair for inviting me to this event, and I think it's a very important question that you raised. No doubt in Islam we understand that the prophethood, that there is a seal of the prophets. So there will be no prophets and no messengers who will come with anything new. But one thing unique about this message of Islam, which has been completed by Allah through Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that we are supposed to take it to humanity because it's for humanity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا وَرَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, that He has sent a messenger for no other purpose but as a mercy to mankind. So that encompasses everybody, including the Muslims. And it's the Muslims who have the responsibility to convey what has been already conveyed. And why does it need to be conveyed further is because it needs to reach everybody. And why does it need to reach everybody? Is because it's come as a mercy, as a solution to people's problems. So this is why it's a big responsibility that the people who assume the responsibility of scholarship, that they see that they need to convey the message of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
It's a very big burden.
It's a very big responsibility.
Okay, Abdul Samad.
Yes, of course.
Your thought on this hadith?
Yeah, I mean, so Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he brought this message to mankind. Now, this message needs to be understood and needs to be, like Brother Abu Muhammad said, that it needs to be conveyed to mankind. So therefore, this knowledge needs to be understood and it needs to be passed on from generation to generation. And the group of people, i.e. the Muslims who are tasked with this responsibility, they need to be led in conveying this message. And therefore, and as well, humanity will face situations, realities, new realities that need to be understood in accordance, in light of that message that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has brought. And so therefore, Therefore, this becomes one of the most fundamental roles of scholars, to really understand the situation, understand the realities, and to be able to give guidance and shed some light on these issues, in order that people follow the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every aspect of their life. And this is ultimately the role and the responsibility of the scholars, to explain, to make clear the way, the path that has been given to humanity from the Creator Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
I think I want to maybe just go back what you said, reality, that different reality that people face. Do you mean that, a lot of the times we have this modern reality or new situation, and people go back to the Quran and Sunnah and say, look, how do you implement, how do you understand this new reality? Do the scholars come in? Because a lot of the times we hear that, you can go directly to the Quran and the Sunnah and find the hukum, because now we have access to Hadith and Quran, and it's translated and so on and so forth. But can you maybe, you said new reality, what do you mean?
Well, of course, we always must go back to the Quran and Sunnah. Now, the challenge here is to be able to understand the Quran and the Sunnah for what it is and how it is understood. What is the correct way to understand these the ayahs of the Quran and the hadith, and how we must apply this to the reality now. And this is where all the technical aspects of knowledge, of understanding the dalil comes in, and this is a task that is not for everybody until they have acquired and mastered maybe a lot of these sciences that really guide us in terms of how to understand these realities and how to understand and implement and apply the text of the Quran and the Sunnah to these realities. And maybe
Brother Muhammad,
elaborate a little bit
is that
more
the
on
reality today?
Well, before we go into the aspect of is it a reality or not, I think what Brother Abdul Samad is talking about is a very important point that he mentioned. But one example comes to my mind is how relevant the sources of Islam are with respect to solving our problems of day to day. Because if we didn't use Islam to solve our problems, we would be using something else other than Islam.
Yep, that's absolutely
so that's why it's very important to understand the Islam, the Quran, the Sunnah, and the Hadith, and it takes a lot of specialization for one to acquire the skills for be able to apply that in the situation. And what we mean by situation is when, for example, in the past, during the time of the Uthmani Khilafah, you had a situation where there was a lot of advancement in the Western Hemisphere, and because the doors of Ijtihad was closed.
What's Ijtihad?
Ijtihad is a process by which the rule of Allah is derived.
Okay.
And it's only done by those who are
so on a new reality they will seek the hukum of Allah, yeah?
Exactly.
Okay,
so for example, in the time, let's go back to a very basic example. In the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they had mode of travel, and that mode of traveling usually was either donkey, it was horseback or camelback. So what were these animals used for primarily? Well, for mode of traveling. So now, in this day and age we live in the modern times, we also travel. So as human beings, we haven't changed. We are traveling. We use these days aeroplanes for traveling, for bicycles, for motorcycles, for cars, and many other means of transportation from going from A to B. Now, in the sources of Islam, in the Quran and Sunnah, Allah has not specifically mentioned about cars and aeroplanes and the like. Okay. But we are able to use those things today. Why? Because in Islam there is no prohibition in these means. Because the camel and the horse and the aeroplanes and the cars, they all have one common denominator, which is they are mode of transport. So this is applying the hukum of Allah on a new situation, and thereby saying that modes of transport such as aeroplanes, cars, trains, buses that we use today are halal for us to use. But then you have new situations as well, such as cloning, because these are new technological advancements have come. What does Islam say about these things? and scholars and from Islam, we need to pass a view on it. We cannot simply just sit back and not make a position from ourselves, a clear position.
And not even that. I mean, if you look at the modern warfares and the way the different nations are set up and the whole structure of that, this is where scholars come in, isn't it? They would give their position on these realities. Do you see that happening now? Do you see scholars are doing that? Or do you think there's a role for them here?
Of course, there's a role for scholars and to be able to explain and clarify a lot of these new issues. I mean,
is that happening?
I would say it's not happening as it should be. In my opinion, I could be wrong. There are many scholars that are trying to address some of these issues, trying to explain, the situation, the way the whole world is, set up, and the way the whole, like you talked about some of the wars, wars that have taken place.
So even now, if you look at Syrian war, if you look at Yemen, if you look at Iraq, I mean, there are a lot of organizations that are actually quite active.
There are many issues. I mean, like even forget wars for a moment. I mean, if we look locally, I mean, the Muslim community here is facing many issues.
Yeah,
many issues. Whether it be prevent, whether it be other issues, we're facing issues. We're having to, as a community, we're having to deal with the establishment on many fronts. Now, we need guidance on these issues. How should the Muslim community respond to some of these issues? How should what position we should take? These things need to be made very clear, and it becomes the responsibility of the scholars to actually give us guidance on these issues. How to deal, how to address some of these issues, and so on. And this is where I say maybe it's not happening as it should be. As it should be. We find, other non-scholarly groups of people, organizations that are actually trying to address some of these issues, and in these situations, we find many of our scholars quite silent. Maybe Brother Abu Muhammad want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think Abu Muhammad, I want to move on. Maybe what do you think are the expectations of the Ummah towards our scholars? Because I think that's something because do they expect what Abdul Samad is saying? Do they expect that, or do they think, look, that's not the role of the scholar? And what you've just said, the role of the scholar is to give hukums on personal issues, maybe.
Can I just add something to this?
Sorry,
I think in the absence of scholars taking the initiative in leading the community on many of these issues, we find that the expectation of the Muslim community has lessened to a point where now they don't actually look to the right group of people for guidance on these things, and that is problematic because we're not actually making reference to Islam as we are supposed to be.
So you see the problem because the reference is not made to Islam.
That's right. So,
but some of the groups are making reference to Islam, are they not?
Of course, no doubt, some are, others are not. So we find that Muslim from the community, they're making reference to scholars for certain aspects or certain matters, whether it be spiritual or personal matters. They go to the scholars, they go to imams, they go to the local masajids to get guidance. But on other issues, namely political issues, social issues and things like this, we find that they're referring to maybe, politicians or other groups of people who are not necessarily giving them anything from Islam as such.
Okay.
Do you see? So that could be problematic, actually.
But Abu Muhammad, you wanted to come in. Sorry, I interrupted.
I think what I would say is maybe just echo what Brother Abdul Samad is saying as well, with respect to the issues that people usually go to alims and ulama for. Before, they were issues of personal matters, such as praying, fasting. Especially, you find there's an upsurge in referring to scholars in the time of Ramadan, because people want to know what breaks to fast, what should you do, what shouldn't you do, and I'm sure there are many calls made to the masajids up and down the country and everywhere else in and around the world to find out the hukums in these matters, but you don't find that same level of approach to the scholars of Islam on matters to do with other socio-political aspect of their life. And that is, I think, something which is lacking. And I think it's mainly for maybe two reasons. One is that maybe because the scholars of today are seen to be quite powerless, okay, to be advisors to the rulers of the day, right? Whether it be in Europe, in this country, or in the Muslim countries, right?
My question is, do they need to advise the rulers? Because you said they are powerless. But can they not lead the community without associating with the rulers or having some sort of connection with the rulers?
No, they can. But in the past, the scholars had a very big role. And in legal terms, in the Western Hemisphere, as we understand, there is something called separation of powers, where the judiciary is separated from the executive. So the parliament is separated from the judges. That's how it should be. Where the fairness and justice will be best served.
Are you talking about the Western countries?
The Western countries, and that's something that has been also exemplified in the Islamic societies as well in the past, when there was a good Islamic ruling at the time. The judges, the scholars were seen as to be the ones who would clarify Islam for the rulers and for the general public, okay, and they would favor and not fear anybody, okay, except Allah, as the Prophet ﷺ and the prophets before them did, when they were being persecuted, when they were being told to change their religion that's been revealed to them, they always withheld from doing such things, but rather they actually put forward their case for what is truth and justice, and without favor and fear. And that's something that we saw in the past, but now it's increasingly coming to a bit of a challenge now, right? Where the scholars are finding it difficult to actually have a role, because of maybe the people, how they view scholars, and the scope the scholars have these days. As I said, they only are dealing with issues to do with personal matters, and maybe not socio-political matters as such as they used to be before, and maybe because they are not being heard, and that's why people don't connect to them as much. So in the month of Ramadan, where there's a lot of connection with scholars, you won't find the same connection with scholars when there is a political issue, or if there's an employment matter, or if there's a matter to do with something to do with the ummah as a whole,
or the economy, or the housing crisis, or bullying. I mean, last week we did a show on bullying. These are concerning, actually, because I just want to go back, because you made the point. You said the rulers and the scholars in the Muslim world, they were together and they made decision. But what's the ruling on scholars being paid by the ruler, or what's the ruling on that? What's your understanding on this?
No, I mean,
because we have why I want to.
I mean, there's nothing wrong. There's not. I don't see nothing wrong with the rulers employing scholars to really give Islam or present Islam or Islamic way forward, even for how to govern and so on and so forth.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure
because,
about that.
Because why do we have this saying the scholars for dollars? I mean, what's all this? Tell me. I want to be a bit more controversial when it comes to the Samad.
Yeah, I mean, like what we can say is, historically, I think this is what Brother Abu Muhammad tried to raise, is that historically we found that the scholars were independent. Independent in the sense that even though they may have been carrying out a particular task on behalf of the scholars, of the rulers, that they retain their independence in the process. So
very important, isn't it?
And that is very, very important, because there's a verse in the Quran, isn't it? إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. The ulama are the ones that fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. So and the thing is, we found that these scholars, they challenged the position of the rulers in many cases. Do you see? And if you actually look to history, you'll find all the renowned, famous scholars that we make reference to today have actually demonstrated their obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over.
Imam Ahmad,
Imam Ahmad, Imam Abu Hanifa, you name it. All of these great scholars of the past had always challenged the position of the rulers in their time.
Very interesting.
And this is the sort of example we actually seek today, in my opinion. Yeah, we need to see scholars that are bold, that demonstrate that they fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and no one else. Because this is a true characteristic of a sincere scholar, that he should fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala And this should be an example for the ummah to follow as well, that we should not fear anyone over and above Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore we should stick to the truth, stick to the haqq, even if it means that, we could endanger our position or our situation, our livelihood, whatever it is, yeah. And this and nobody has demonstrated this better than the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were the ones that challenged the whole society in their times.
The authority,
the culture, the norm, the whole society at large, really, to really convey this message of Islam and bring Islam to reality.
Brother Muhammad,
I think if anybody believes in standing for justice, even if it's against our own selves, mainly Muslims, nobody can surpass the Muslims in that. And I think the past, the history, it's not just idealistic ideas, but in the past and history it has demonstrated that we are able to do
examples,
that.
That's what you're
live
saying.
Examples, absolutely. So
and that's why we refer to classical scholars.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I think the primary thing is that to fear Allah over and above anybody else. And that means even if it is something that's against our own selves, but we are able to speak out against it. Okay, even if it's our own people who are doing wrong to our own, we are speaking up against it. And just as much we will speak out if a non-Muslim or somebody of a different religion is being persecuted and attacked and being somehow treated very badly, they need to also be spoken out and taken care and looked out for their interest as well. Because Islam came and the prophets of Allah were sent to this dunya for taking care of people. And Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the last messenger of Allah who came to give rights even to the animals. And we are advocates for animal rights much as we are advocates for any other kind of rights. But we find that situation we live in this day and age is that sometimes the role of scholar is so limited that their voice is almost muted. And sometimes the fear of going against the establishment worries them too much, to the extent that they are not. And what Brother Abdul Samad,
do you think they were tamed by the rulers?
Sometimes
we see a lot of the scholars are behind these corrupt rulers. Yeah? So whether you have any of the rulers from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Egypt. Assad, Egypt, there are big scholars, institutions behind these dictators.
This is where the separation of power is not there.
I think that's what Abdul Samad was actually saying. In fact, I've got a very good question. In light of all the atrocities and problems across the world, how comes we do not see our scholars taking leadership and speaking up?
Well, it's a shame, really. I mean, like just looking at the Arab Spring, for example. If you actually look and see, it wasn't actually the scholars that actually came forward to
starting the revolution. You mean?
Yes, that's right. We found the common people. The common people came out and they questioned their rulers. They wanted to change and they demanded change, and they were willing to put their lives down, for this change. All right, I'm not saying all of it was Islamic or everyone that came out was calling for Islam. That's not the point. But the point is, it's the people that came out. And then months into the whole thing, we found a band of scholars come out and they want to now.
But saying that, it could be that the scholars were behind. Because
I haven't seen any evidence for that, really. What I have seen is that it was the masses, the public, that came out. And similarly, we find there were issues that concern the people very much, yet we find nothing coming from, just looking, just even in this community, for example, we find there are many issues that nobody's addressing, but the people are very much concerned, very much, need of guidance.
Organizations, like you said previously, there are organizations that are taking that role. Brother Muhammad, what's your thought on this?
With respect to which particular point?
In terms of leadership, scholars taking leadership or speaking out of the truth. I mean, how do in terms of what's happening in the world, where do you see the scholars? What's their position?
Their position, as we talked about in the beginning, their position is very vital, because in Islam, the deen, Islam.
How do they look at these scholars?
The Ummah looks at it in terms of what powers and position they have. At the moment, they don't have any established power, as in that they are the source of reference point for matters of all aspects of our life. They're not seen as that. They're seen as only for individual issues. And number two, where there are scholars who do speak and who do say the right things, and they don't fear and favor anybody, you find that they are usually imprisoned, or they are not given the voice. They're marginalized and they're imprisoned in the Muslim countries usually, and so you find that the good scholars usually are in prison, and the ones who are the scholars for dollars, as we said, they are the ones who are around and they are pacifying the rulers and trying to pacify the masses. In allowing the rulers to do what they do, right? So it's a difficult position for the Ummah, I believe now, because in those times, and the people that Abdul Samadi talked about, some of the scholars, there were many thousands of scholars in the past, but the ones we know about are people like Ibn Taymiyyah, the people like Abu Hanifa, people like Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal. We don't just know them for their madhab and their fiqh rules and their understanding, but rather we know them well and very well because of their sacrifice and standing for the truth, and when it mattered, when times were difficult.
You don't even have to go that far back. I mean, if you look at India, for example, under British occupation, we've had literally thousands upon thousands of scholars that actually took that position when it mattered. They
what did they do? Just elaborate a bit more on that, so our listeners can benefit from this story.
If you see the uprising of India under British occupation, it was largely actually led by the ulama. Jamiyat ulama. They were the people that actually led the revolt that demanded a change. The independence.
Was Gandhi part of this as well? I believe I was reading somewhere.
There were many Hindu movements that actually aligned themselves with the Muslims, with the Muslim ulama, and supported the call and the cause for.
Was that a nationalistic movement?
No. They were sincerely calling for the return of Islam and the establishment of the Sharia.
Were they somehow linking themselves to the Ottoman Caliphate at that time?
Of course they were, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, the greatest, the first Khilafat movement actually started in India.
Wow.
And the ulama of India were the leaders in this call. So a lot of respect goes out to these ulama who have sacrificed, and we should never forget these people.
Brilliant. Let me move on to my next section of the show. There's a mentality among some Muslims that they don't need to understand so much of Islam as long as they don't need to understand so much of Islam as long as the scholars back in their action. Yeah. So, for example, I have someone who I've been telling them they're in the alcohol business, and I said, look, you need to get out. This is not halal. Yeah, this is haram. Yeah. He's got a restaurant, so he sells alcohol. And one day he really got upset, and he said, look, you keep on telling me this is haram and haram. I've got this sheikh who said, as long as I give this portion of my earning to sadaqah and pay the government, and as long as I don't use that for my family, then it's okay. And he was a bit upset and said, look, you're nobody. You're telling me that this is haram, and I have scholars who are saying, look, it's okay. Is there room for questioning? I mean, this is the point. It's like, I didn't know what to say. I thought, well, he's got a point. I'm not a scholar. I
think there are people of two categories that comes to my mind when you give. One category is of the one you just mentioned about. The one, actually, I believe he knows it is not allowed. He knows it is haram. And he will just look and will be fishing for hukums that will justify him doing what he wants to do, right? And that's where he can find these type of people who will give him this type of verdicts, which will give him the allowance to do what he does.
Yeah.
And he will find them wherever he has to go. He will go and look for them and find them. So with these people, you can't really, how shall I say, change them as such unless they change within themselves and really take Islam as it should be taken. Yeah.
I mean, that's one example. It's a growing problem in our community, really. I mean, you talked about a fringe group of scholars and who are giving this, dodgy fatwas, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
But there are prominent scholars and we're not allowed to name any of the scholars here, but they are in terms of like mortgage, riba, they are quite openly saying, look, you can buy a house with riba. And there are people, sincere people, they're looking, they have issues. Obviously, everyone has issues in this country, having a house, trying to buy a house.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that? Because there are scholars, prominent scholars, who are saying that riba is okay in certain circumstances.
Well, the problem... Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, if whoever wants to come in.
Yeah, I think here, the first thing that I think we need to understand is that, knowledge of Islam, knowledge in Islam is actually not a monopoly that lies with a band of people called the ulama. Knowledge is actually an obligation upon every Muslim. Every Muslim is obliged to seek knowledge and understand the hukum and excel and develop their understanding and knowledge, because ultimately it is they who are responsible and they will have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day. Now, the problem I see is that there are groups of Muslims that are actually, they rely on scholars to a point where they have abandoned this whole duty of seeking knowledge. They have left that task with a band of people, and whatever they say is halal or is haram, is whatever they say, and we don't need to look into this, and we don't need to understand. It's blind following. And a verse of the Quran comes to mind when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the Jews and the Christians, they made gods out of their priests and their rabbis. And a Christian, ex-Christian who became a Muslim, asked the Prophet ﷺ the question where he said, how is that? Because I was a Christian and we never saw our rabbis or our priests as gods. And he said, is it not that your priests, they made halal what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made haram? And he said yes. And is it not that what was halal that they made into haram, and then you followed that too? And he said yes. And then Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam explained, that is your worship to your priest and your rabbi. And unfortunately, there are pockets of Muslims that are actually taking or making the very same mistake, if you like, where they have delegated that entire responsibility to a band of people that they, whatever they say is, and whatever they say isn't. Do you see? And that is a very dangerous approach to take, and this is something that needs to change, I feel, within our community. And I think even scholars need to be questioned. There's, some people may see that as disrespect, but I can't agree. I can't agree with that. I think there's no disrespect in making inquiry, trying to understand the matter, taking a detailed and a deeper explanation from the scholar as to how they derive these hukums, how because they need to be able to explain these things, because at the end of the day, my duty is to worship and follow the hukum from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Brother Muhammad, so how do we avoid being disrespectful to scholars?
I think firstly, any scholar who is truly a scholar would not take anything that anybody lay as a question,
as an offense.
Okay. Because we are told, if you don't know, go to the people who do know. And that means for every matter, we can turn to somebody, who can explain things, and they shouldn't feel offended if we were to ask them any questions that comes across uncomfortable, right? But I think more important than that, as Abdul Samad has actually said, but example comes to my mind, is that we must have a mind where we want to actually worship Allah, and that's the most important thing. I think when generally people are of certain caliber, you find the scholars are from amongst the people. If you think about it,
I started off with this hadith.
Absolutely. So it's from the people that comes scholarship. So when the people have this zeal and the want to worship Allah, right, and to inquire and to seek knowledge, without fear or favor, and you find people will rise from amongst that, and some will have more specialized knowledge, and they will be able to help and enlighten other people even more.
The different scholars have different specialities, isn't it?
Exactly.
Let me take some text. We're getting a lot of text. If I don't read all of them, my apologies, because I've got a lot of questions here that I want to go through with the brothers. One of the texts says, what can the scholars really do in the Muslim countries because they are living under tyrant rulers? These sincere scholars will get arrested. What do you expect them to do? That's a text. And another text, it says, one of the main role of scholars is to guide humanity from darkness to light in terms of ethical understanding of living, which is in line with the revelation, in line with the revealed message, Islam.
Yes.
Message Islam, sorry. Is there any living scholars today or in the past that has given us a ijtihad, guidelines of how to reestablish Sharia in society from the grip of secularism? If so, can the speaker summarize their ijtihad? I think that's quite long, but if you guys want to quickly just summarize that. Living scholars,
the first point I would
guidelines how to establish Sharia. Yeah. Are the scholars doing that?
The first point is it's a very, how shall I say, one has to be in that situation to realize how it feels to be under tyrannical rule and be a person of Islamic knowledge, and if they are locked up, they have to see it as themselves, as they are the inheritors of the prophets. Just the same way the prophets were persecuted, some of them were killed, and many things happened to them. They were exiled and many things, right? From
So they are doing that dawah.
Exactly,
if they are in prison,
that's
then they are doing the dawah.
They are doing, and Allah would not question you more than your capacity.
Absolutely.
So what's important is that they are sincere and they work within their capacity, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward them accordingly. And victorious is not the one who lives. Victorious is the one who leaves the message behind. But himself, he might be killed in that process. And that may well happen, as happened in the past.
Very nice. Very nice point.
Earlier we discussed about respect towards the scholar. No doubt. Islam puts a lot of emphasis on respecting the people of knowledge and so on. But that is very well known, and it's kind of like something that is quite famous in the sense that everybody knows we need to respect the scholars, but Islam has also talked about respect to everyone. Do you see? So even respect to the ummah, for example, that is also emphasized in Islam, but perhaps maybe we don't hear that so often. I just want to say, like sometimes I do listen to maybe some of the scholars of today, and I'll be quite honest, as an general
public
person from the public, right? Sometimes I feel offended, right? I really do.
Give me an example.
I'll give an example.
You get quite offended easily.
Yeah. No, I do. I listen to many lectures, and what you will find is that there are some scholars that talk about the ummah in a very negative and very sort of like
they're not worthy
in a language that really undermines, if you like, the ummah, and always blaming the ummah, or Muslims don't do this, Muslims are so bad, Muslims are backward, Muslims they do this haram. Do you see what I mean? And it's very generalized and
maybe he has got a point. There are some Muslims.
There are some possibly. There are some possibly. But to me that is disrespectful. Do you see? Because that's like generalizing the entire ummah in a particular way. There's a hadith that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the one who curses this ummah is cursed himself. Do you see? So and there's always khair in this ummah. Do you see? And instead of giving confidence and sort of like motivating the Muslim ummah in
optimistic,
to give optimism to the ummah. They sometimes, I find a lot of scholars, what they do, they end up demoralizing, they end up blaming, And there's a very negative effect that it actually has upon the Muslims. Can I just finish this, please?
Yeah, sorry, I've got a text out. I think that will be in line. But
because what this does, it actually creates a psyche within the average Muslim that they feel worthless, and they feel sort of like, a disconnect from issues that they feel that they are not worthy to be able to look into or address or take concern in. If you understand what I'm trying to say, it's like, look, if
someone keeps on undermining me,
if you're in teaching, for example, and you look at students, you look at children, if you constantly undermine a student, if you constantly tell them that they're not worth it, that they're rubbish, that they are doing this wrong and they're doing that wrong, what is that? What effect is that going to have on that child?
He's going to leave a big scar. He's not going to be progressive. He's going to give up.
Exactly. And unfortunately, I feel I could be wrong. Maybe Abu Muhammad will maybe clarify this for me better. But I feel nowadays what we have with a lot of celebrity scholars is that they do a lot of lectures on
let me read the text. I think what you're saying, this text really fits in very well.
Okay.
And I would like you guys to maybe, just think about this text. It says, a prominent scholar in America said Muslims should avoid ummah politics and focus on local issues in America with fellow non-Muslims. Let the scholars in the Muslim world deal with the problems in the Muslim world. We are American Muslims, cannot do anything over there. We cannot do anything over there. We have enough issues in America. So he's talking about, look, forget about what's happening in the Muslim world. Forget about our concern of this concept of ummah. We've got so much problems in America, which is true. But how do you answer this? It's almost local. I mean, this whole concept that, look, we need to just worry about ourselves.
Well, the problem is even worse. I mean, there are others that will even tell you not to even look at your local problems. Just look at yourself. And this is the sort of effect that it has. When you're constantly, blaming the Muslims and the person, the individual. This individual becomes very insular. That they start looking at themselves, and any problem that they see as too great a problem for me, because I have problems myself. Do you see? And the greatest problem is me, and I have no responsibility because that is beyond me.
Absolutely.
Do you see? And that's the sort of mentality. I mean, you will find historically wasn't with the Muslim Ummah. Muslims. How are you going to convey this message to humanity when you've become so insular and so focused on yourself perpetually, forever, that, and this is the negative type of mindset that it creates in the minds of the Muslims, where, and for that reason, you'll find that, the other people are managing the affairs, our issues, our situations, while we are just paralyzed.
I think on this text, I've got a question. There's a new trend of celebrity scholars who are dominating social media, which we are aware of, and really have an impact on our youth with ideas such as nationalism. So again, America, like the text said quite nicely, that we should be concerned with your locality, and individualism, which you've just mentioned, that look, you should concentrate on yourself. Only being concerned about oneself. Does it disconnect from the ummah, and how dangerous is this disconnection?
Absolutely, it does cause a big disconnect in the ummah, because, like it or not, the simple reality is that as Muslims, we will always feel for other Muslims. No matter how much you try to quash that idea, it's not going to happen. Rather, what's going to happen is it's going to go into dark corners, and you'll have dark people coming with dark ideas and will cause havoc in society. And that's what happens usually. When you don't allow a voice to be aired about a matter, then usually it goes underground. And so that's why, for number one, to keep the matters up and in the air, and have a discussion about it is something which the scholar should not shy away from and deny the ummah. Because this is a reality of human reality. If there are people that are expatriates who live somewhere in Spain or France and they are British, you'll find that if they have families over there, they will have concern for these people, right? Even if they are not there, they will have concern for their well-being as mothers, grandmothers, children, aunts, uncles, and what have you. And that's how we see that the idea of ummah for us is more stronger than the connection of blood, because we have a connection which is dictated by the Islamic creed, which makes us the people who are one body, as Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has described us. And in Islam, the idea is more true to say that the bond of iman is thicker than blood, and you find that for this reason there will always be that connection. And when anybody tries to disengage that connection, they will actually cause more trouble and cause more mayhem. Rather than that, they should actually speak the truth where truth needs to be spoken. Where it's the fault of the Muslim, it should be highlighted where and how and what needs to be done to come out of that situation. And also where there's a fault of Western powers for meddling in the affairs of the Muslims in certain ways as they have done, and they've got it wrong so badly, that also needs to be highlighted and needs to be highlighted well and good in good faith. So this is where I feel that the disengagement is not going to work, because people will end up going to the wrong people to get advice.
That is the case, isn't it?
And that's exactly what's happening. And that's why you find fringe groups from here and there, and this lone and a scholar from here or there, or somebody who pops up from here and there making certain comments and causing havoc in the minds of youth and so forth comes about, because the scholars of today they're suppressing what people feel about their concerns, rather than airing them. I think
very nice point you've made. If you look at like even the whole concept of jihad, Sharia, Khilafah, these are not discussed by our scholars, and hence like you said, you have youth going on to YouTube, going on to websites and finding these really obscure ijtihads and whatnot, and they're implementing this. So I think, do you think maybe because they're not speaking of these issues because of the government, or do you think they should speak out? They should give, why shouldn't we speak about these issues? These are Islamic issues.
Absolutely. I think they need to be talked about and they need to be clarified.
Absolutely.
Because the media has put a spin on those things.
That's the thing.
And because of that, a lot of people are confused, including the general public in any given society.
Yeah.
And when these issues are not being talked about, it causes a lot of mayhem. Yeah. In the mind of the Muslims, they don't know what's right and what's wrong, what's right and wrong, and the general population, due to the media bombardment of a certain idea, a certain line of Islam being maligned and so forth, the general population are very disillusioned as well. So that actually causes more animosity and more disengagement in society. We can't engage unless we're able to talk. And talking doesn't mean appeasing to terrorism or extremism, right? Yeah. And I think this idea of extremism and terrorism has been overspun. And I think, where are we now? 2016? And in the next 10, 15 years' time, we'll sit maybe in the same place and we'll talk about how the idea of terrorism and extremism being spun out of control actually caused the most problems in society.
That's a good point. Abdul Samad, you've got a lot to say about this pop star culture. What do you have to say? What's your thoughts?
Oh,
you can be frank.
Yeah, I mean, we grew up. I mean, I grew up at a time when, Muslim youth were, looking into Islam, and they wanted to be Islamic, where they had a background where probably they were, following some pop star or something like that, and they had this vacuum now. All of a sudden, they needed somebody to follow or someone to really look up to, and in that, I feel came along a lot of speakers, Islamic speakers that done beautiful lectures and things like this.
Very entertaining.
Yeah, they're entertaining. They're very well spoken, and nowadays you get a lot of English speaking scholars, which is good in many sense, because they can actually connect with the new generation of Muslims, where previously there were not so many English speaking scholars. But at the same time, you know, like I feel that, you know, it's you know, these scholars, you know, they some of these scholars are good maybe in some of the knowledge that they have acquired, whether it be, you know, Arabic language or you know, tafsir or so on and so forth. But at the same time, you know, like we discussed earlier, you know, sometimes these scholars then enter into territories where they actually have no speciality, and that is very dangerous. You know,
So
just
I mean,
because
example, what are the realities that they go into?
Well,
I'm assuming politics, or
more specifically politics, economics, you know, these sort of things. Yeah, we find that they end up giving, like the text that you read out, where scholars are now talking about how to disconnect from ummah politics to localized politics, and for that there is no basis in Islam. Do you see? You know, so but you find that probably that scholar who actually made that suggestion has no speciality, has no knowledge in Islamic politics as such, who has no history, who hasn't really studied in details the politics, Islamic politics, you know, the
rule of
the system,
engagement and
exactly.
whatnot,
So these sort of things. So and they do have a huge following.
Yeah,
because of this pop culture, if you like, within Islam, where you know, and these are the scholars that I would call.
Why I say pop culture is I know some people they actually, when these big celebrity scholars come along, they leave everything, they go to the show, they invite me, and afterwards I would discuss with them, and I would say, look, you know, so what was their main message? You know, you ask him, so what was it like? He goes, it was brilliant, you know, it was really good, you know, and da. And I said, so what was the message? Yeah, it's about just, you know, being good Muslim. So really, is there a key message that they take away? Because there isn't. And I felt that there wasn't.
This is precisely what I felt, you know, growing up. We used to go in groups to listen to different speakers, and we'd come out and we'd be more confused, you know, afterwards than we were before. You know, we actually went to listen to that scholar, and we found that they were very nicely presented, and they did demonstrate that they have a lot of knowledge, and they
mesmerize you with their like.
It is quite mesmerizing. That's right, but. Yeah. In terms of the message, sometimes I felt that, you know, what was the point of all of this? And me personally, I mean, I'm not the type to sort of like follow personalities. You know, that's just my character. I've always been like this. While I'm practicing Islam, and even before then, I always like to scrutinize something and really look into something, you know, and try to understand it for myself. And what I found with these scholars is that they did beautiful lectures, and sometimes the message was completely not there. So, I mean, that could be a problem potentially. I don't know.
Abu Muhammad, I mean, related hadith, I'm sure you're aware of that. That's a pious man whom Allah ordered the angels to destroy. What was the hadith, if you could relate that?
Yeah, I mean, this was, I think, a narration, if I'm right, related to how a man who was sitting in the mosque and he was actually disengaged with society. He was actually only engaged himself with the worship and ibadah and salah and so on, and he stopped just there. He didn't go anywhere beyond that. And then the angels were sent to go and destroy that town, because the town was very corrupted. It has a lot of corruption going on, and when the angels went there, they were quite confused as to what to do. When they saw this man in the mosque, actually
very pious
and he's very devotional towards Allah, they asked the question and went back, and what was told to them is that destroy it on top of his head. Okay, why? Because he saw a lot of fasad and corruption and a lot of ills in society, and he did not do anything or do enough or come out to do what was right, to actually condemn what was wrong. right? And that's the reason why he got punished.
I think I've got 5 minutes left, and I want you guys to give me an example of classical scholars and how they protected the deen and how they were engaged with the deen and how they, what sort of actions that they did. I know we did start off with some classical scholars, but give us some examples that comes to your mind.
One of the things I would say is that, scholars that have actually left a mark in history, you'll find are scholars that really understood their time and the need...
Or the need of the time.
The need of the time and what the deen required in order for it to, to preserve and to propagate and to present. And this is the thing that you'll find with all the great scholars, that they understood their reality in a particular way and they addressed these issues and these things. We are living in this time and we have needs, we have issues. And it is those people that really understand this reality and this situation and what Islam demands as an ummah, collectively, as an ummah, to preserve and protect and to propagate this deen, are those people that will be remembered in history. And there are, and this is why I say a lot of these pop scholars, right? Really, in history, they will leave no mark, because they will not have done anything significant, anything that is meaningful for the protection and preservation of this deen.
I think that's a very interesting point. You said protection and preservation. I think if you look this is the key thing, isn't it? If you look at, they didn't look for the ummah as the benefits of the ummah. Rather, they looked at the protection of the deen. Yeah?
That's right.
So if it means protecting the deen, if it means it harms the ummah, they rather do that than to and protect the deen. So I think that's the difference I see. I don't know, from the discussion.
I mean, if you look at like people like Imam Bukhari, for example, Imam Muslim, these were the scholars that came in at a time when a lot of corruption was coming in, and Islam required the preservation of the
corruption. Meaning
corruption in the sense that a lot of hadith were fabricated. A lot of the knowledge of Islam was disappearing. A lot of the Sahabis, they were passing away.
So for the benefit of our listeners, people are making up hadith and they're writing things which just making things up. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. So for them, they needed to preserve the hadith. The Quran was protected already, all right. Yeah. But the hadith were being fabricated. A lot of things were coming in, and people were listening to it, and they thought that it was a hadith and things like that. So we found an entire science developed at that time through these scholars that become a reference point for us today. When we talk about hadith, we quickly, first thing we say is it ahad? Is it mutawatir? Is it? That's right. So it's not. So this whole science, and plus we refer to the books of these scholars predominantly. Yeah. So we understand their input into the preservation of this deen, and this is where they have, left their mark. We find later on, the scholars, people like Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i. People were becoming confused. People didn't know how to approach the Quran and the Hadith. They were deriving rules that were contrary, if you like. So they came at a time and they developed this whole science in terms of how to, extract rules from the Quran and the Sunnah, the do's and the don'ts. What is the right way to approach certain types of verses, a Hadith. How should they be interpreted? So all these technicalities, they developed an entire science, which we make reference to today. This is the significance, So this is what I say, like there are great scholars today that are doing something of that sort where they are actually at the forefront. Now, it may appear to many that, oh, these scholars are not very popular, or these scholars are, like, we haven't heard of these scholars, and so on and so forth. You see, where is their YouTube page? Where is their Facebook page? You know what I mean? Yeah? But for the sincere Muslims, they will know that these are the people who are the frontiers, if you like, in protecting and preserving this deen and seeking to establish, the hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth again.
MashaAllah. Brother Abu Muhammad, last words from me. We're running out of time.
I think again, Abdul Samad, he highlighted about their qualities and why we know them for. And another quality which we know them for is their bravery, is their honesty. It's not just their knowledge. If you look at Ibn Taymiyyah, what did he actually say when he was in prison? He said, what can my enemies do to me? If they imprison me, then I'm with Allah. I'm alone. I'm in solitude. If they banish me and they exile me, then I'm with other people. I go to a different land and I will convey the message of the truth to another set of people who will listen to me more. And if they kill me, then I will taste the death of a shaheed. Yeah. So you see the bravery and the honesty and the truthfulness. And I think any scholar, any person of ilm and knowledge take on that responsibility should realize that they have a heavy responsibility on their shoulder. And if they cannot and will not be able to deliver that, then my humble advice to them would be they should stand down. Rather than doing a wrong,
keep quiet really on that,
exactly,
instead of giving a position.
Keep quiet, or stand down from their position of being an imam or being somebody who's of some authority. It's better that they retire due to ill health, early retirement, right, and go into solitude and be with Allah and ask for His forgiveness for their inaction, but then to do actions that are misleading the people.
Yeah, very important. Very, very nice. Actually, I really enjoyed that. Time is not with us, inshallah. So we'll have to end it here. Jazakallah khair. Very interesting discussion and some really good points to ponder upon. I hope you have enjoyed this session, but I will have to end it here. Sorry about that. This discussion we have at Straight Talk will be available on our Middle Path Radio YouTube channel. And also on our website, which is straight-talk.co.uk. So please share amongst your family and friends so they can benefit from these discussions, inshallah. I would like to thank the brothers for coming down and taking part in this discussion. Jazakallah khair.
Barakallahu feek.
Okay. And a special thanks to all our listeners for listening and contributing to this show. I really appreciate your comments, questions. Please join in next week, inshallah. You can follow us on Twitter at Middle Path Radio and continue with this discussion. Again, thank you for listening to Middle Path Radio. I hope you have a nice evening. See you next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Middle Path Radio, your #1 online Islamic talk station.